this email? What does it mean?
Communication is the imparting or exchanging of information or
The
news.
single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place.
Conversation is the oral exchange of sentiments, observations, opinions, or ideas.
Forbes Books Radio presents The Conversation with Clinton M. Padgett.
Today's guest is an expert on one of the most critical leadership skills of all, clear, compelling communication. Joel Schwartzberg is the principal of joelschwartzberg.net, which helps teams identify, sharpen, and champion their most important points. He's a communication coach, public speaking expert, and the author of Get to the Point, Sharpen Your Message and Make Your Words Matter. He helps teams, leaders, and organizations transform their ideas into impactful messages that inspire action and drive results. From 2013 to 2024, Joel served as Senior Director of Executive and Strategic Communications for a major national nonprofit. Earlier in his career, he held senior communications roles with Nickelodeon, PBS, and Time Inc. I saw that on your LinkedIn. There's just great stories about all that stuff. So, a former collegiate, state, and national champion public speaker and award-winning speechwriter, Joel has spent decades teaching presentation skills and messaging skills to executives at organizations like American Express, Blue Cross Blue Shield, the Brennan Center for Justice, Sandia National Labs, and State Farm Insurance. His work has appeared in Harvard Business Review, Fast Company, Newsweek, and Inc., where he's become known for his no-nonsense approach to communication. Stop meandering, start making meaning. In a world overloaded with noise, Joel's message is simple and powerful. It's not about talking more, it's about saying what truly matters. Joel, it's an honor to have you here today. Thank you so much for joining us on The Conversation.
Thank you, Clint. I'm very pleased and happy to be with you and your listeners.
I'm very happy to have you. So I was chatting with you offline, but basically we're going to talk today about Get to the Point, which I love. Just read that one. And then another one I will talk about maybe later, but language of leadership. So that's also on my to-do list. But all right, we'll jump right into it. I like to think of all the people that come on the show as superheroes, and all superheroes have an origin story. So what's yours? What got you to where you are today?
Yeah, my origin story, the challenge of that is sort of capsulizing it. But
you weren't bitten by a spider, a radioactive spider or anything.
Yeah, something like that. But if I wrote a book called Get to the Point, then I should be able to do just that. So let me break it up into some of my aha moments. I started doing competitive public speaking when I was in 6th grade, and I continued with it. It's an activity called forensics through high school and through senior year of college. I was a national champion at the end of college, and then I thought I was done. I was like that basketball player who's like, all right, well, I got to get a job now. But the thing is that when I interviewed for jobs, when I spoke at conferences, when I talked to my direct report or to my bosses, I was using all the things I learned as a public speaking competitor. So the first aha moment was I can actually share these skills with people in the business community where it honestly really counts, where you're not getting trophies, but it plays a role in your success. So I worked with a company called Media Bistro to do quote unquote public speaking consulting. The standard stuff that frankly, you can go to AI or Google now to get all the tips you need. But a funny thing happened about 3 years into it. I didn't get bitten by a radioactive spider, but I asked some of my clients, hey, just so we're on the same page, what is your point? What's your big takeaway? And Clint, the things they replied back to me were not points. Either they wouldn't have one, or they confused a point with a theme or a topic or a catchphrase or a definition or an observation or a notion. Things that you can argue that you could only just sort of put out there and maybe attach a couple of adjectives to. So it got me thinking, and I spent a lot of time trying to understand what is a point. I mean, we're familiar with that word. You've heard get to the point, and this speaker never got to the point. And, what's your point? But I don't think we've ever sort of unburied it and unpacked it. So I wrote the book, Get to the Point, to capsulize that. And I really transformed all of my training to that, because if you don't have a point, not just in your speeches, but in your emails and your articles and your blogs and your posts and your Slack conversations, then you are rendered pointless. So between the book and my job as a speechwriter at that time, sort of late in my career, I learned so much that I really wanted to devote it all into private practice and private clients. So I created joelschwartzberg.net. And now I deal with everybody from scientists to salespeople to CEOs to interns, and everything from cybersecurity to nonprofit advocacy, because what I'm training is so foundational. And I just love teaching it, but I also enjoy learning more about it. And the more I learn, the more I can teach.
So we open this podcast every week with the George Bernard Shaw quote that says the single biggest problem with communication is the illusion that it has taken place. And I would say, having read the book, you seem to agree with that statement. In fact, you even quote a 2023 study that found poor workplace communication costs U.S. businesses $1.2 trillion with a T annually.
Yeah, absolutely. And the evidence is in everyone's anecdotes. I mean, I would ask everyone who's listening right now, have you ever seen someone ramble? Have you ever gotten an email that you had to untangle to understand the point of it? Have you ever had a workplace communication that went down a rabbit hole or just got so general in a meeting that you never really got to the important things in the meeting agenda because people just sort of took their time in trying to identify their own point, trying to make a point, trying to argue a point, interrupting each other? We've all been in this situation. So those statistics are one way to prove it, but it's inarguable that people are having trouble getting to the point. And I just enjoy helping them untangle that, not just with theory and not just throwing Simon Sinek at them saying, start with why, but how to express that why. Tools and exercises and workshops that really tell people if what you have is a point or not and how to sharpen that point so it has impact.
So it's funny, when I was reading the book, I was reminded of the game we all play as kids called Telephone, which is a slightly different point that you're trying to make here, but it's basically the fun of the game is, of course, if you've never played it, is that the first kid has a secret, whispers to the next kid, who whispers to the third kid on down the line. And what makes the game so much fun is that in the end, what the last kid thinks the secret is not remotely close to what the first kid actually said. And what's not fun is that same thing happens in the business world today. Yeah. Where as a leader, I think I have a very clear message or a point that I'm trying to get across, and then I'm befuddled when people don't do what I clearly stated. And my contention is that if you had a conversation instead where you actually ask clarifying questions, then you would actually get a message that doesn't get mangled as you go through the organization. And the example I like to use is, if you and I are driving somewhere and Joel, you say, Clint, take a left, and and you think that's crystal clear. It's not right. It's not straight. It's not turn around. It's to make a left. That's clear. But then I'm going to say, okay, Joel, you mean to make a left at the McDonald's, the stop sign, or the major intersection with the stoplight? So by asking clarifying questions, I'll truly understand what your left really means. And to me, that's getting to the point is being able to say clearly what you want and not meandering all around.
Right. And critically, understanding it from your audience's perspective, not just from your perspective. When I work with CEOs, often they start with the wrong question, but it seems right. And that is, what do I want to say today? That's the wrong question, especially internally. The right question is, what does my audience want and need to hear? And I just posted something on LinkedIn about this, because if you're not connecting with what they want and need to hear and understanding what they already know and need to supplement that, then you will be out of touch no matter how much you perfected your point. So it's a crucial part of that process. But you're right. Often speakers and communicators, they see it like a Christmas tree. And the more ornaments and details I add to it, the bigger it'll glow. I'm just giving you more and more and more and more ideas to understand the value of what I'm saying. What they don't understand is that when people receive multiple pieces of information, those pieces fight each other for your attention. And in that fight, the impact of each is diluted. I often say it like this, and I like these sort of fortune cookie sayings, as long as they're substantial. If I tell you, Clint, a lot of things, you might remember none of them. If I tell you some things, you might remember some of them. If I tell you one thing, you will remember all of them. Yeah. So it's one idea, or at least one idea at a time.
No, I love that. In fact, I was emblazoned in my mind when I read that. I love that so much. Because it's kind of like the one where in my world where you do project work, we want one owner for every activity, because the old saying is anybody could have done it. Somebody should have done it. Nobody did it. And now everybody pays the price, right? I mean, so it's
Right, everybody pays the price.
so I get it. And you were just talking about, you opened the book with the idea most people don't have a point. And so maybe we can start by, because you have some great exercises in the book about fill in the blank and all that stuff. Maybe just educate the listeners on when somebody thinks they have a point, but it actually isn't a point. What makes a point a point?
Right. Well, in a broad sense, a point is not just an idea being shared. It is a proposition, a recommendation, a suggestion, an assertion. And we've come across these things before under different names. In colleges, we called it a thesis. In PR, we call it a key message. In executive communication, sometimes we call it an elevator pitch. But it's basically the boiled down argument, not like a Thanksgiving over the table argument, but what in debate we used to call an argument, a proposition, an assertion, not just a sharing of ideas. But I do want to share some of these exercises. And I'll preface it by saying, I also teach this stuff to third graders through seventh graders in my community. And yes, I did say third graders. And so the things I'm about to share, I also share with them. So it just shows how basic they are. And the most important one is called the I believe that test. Basically, you take what you think is your point or your elevator pitch, your one sentence idea, you put the words I believe that in front of it, and you ask yourself one question. Is it now a complete sentence? Would it get a check plus from my fourth grade language arts teacher as a complete sentence, not a run-on, and certainly not a fragment? So let's take an example. Let's say podcasting. Is this a complete sentence? I believe that podcasting. No. But we hear people saying, what are you going to talk about today? I'm going to talk about podcasting. What about I believe that the value of podcasting? Nope. I believe that the importance or the future of podcasting. Nope. These aren't complete sentences. It forces you to say something like, I believe that podcasting will be the most effective way to attract our millennial audience. Now you have a complete sentence and it makes you go, go on, because you're sort of interested. I'm interested in capturing a millennial audience. We haven't done such a good job with them. But how do I do it? I see. I do it with the podcast. And that gets into the other test, which I call the XY test. A solid point will have an X, a means of attaining the impact, and a Y, the impact. Let's go back to the podcasting point. I believe that podcasting, the X, will lead to Y, attracting a millennial audience. But sometimes we only say the X. I believe we should have a podcast. All right, says the other person, but why? To what end? Or some only have the Y and not the X. I believe we really need to target this millennial audience. To which the other person says, yeah, I agree, but how? The podcast. So you need both what I'm proposing will be the turnkey to that solution, and I need to articulate the highest value solution. You wouldn't believe, Clint, how many nonprofits that are in the business of saving lives that are making points that don't end with, this will save lives. They end with, well, this will bring traffic to our website. This will enable us to build more facilities. This will bring more revenue in the fourth quarter. This will get more people writing checks. And I'm like, hey, you're in the business of saving lives. That's what people love about you. Play that ace card because you can. Now, for some, it's about selling more Coca-Cola. But if you're in the business of selling lives, go ahead and say that.
That's great. When I read this, it was also it resonated with me because in, again, the world that I live in, which is project management work, we have a charter document and you're defining what your scope is and why you're doing it, which we call the objectives, which very much matches up with your X and Y because scope is what you do to achieve the objective, which is why you're doing it in the first place. And I like to tell people we get to play the why game now that we played as kids. So when somebody says, for the example I like to use is, hey, the project is we're going to renovate an existing facility and we're going to shut down 3 satellite facilities and move everybody to the same place. And so you say, well, what's the objective? Well, the objective is to renovate a facility. No. Why are you renovating that facility?
Right.
Well, because we're at 3 places, we want to go down to 1 place. But why do you want to go down to 1 place? We want to reduce transportation costs by 30%. So now you've got to the why. So totally, it was like you're speaking my language when you said that.
Yeah. And sometimes the why is different based on the audience. If it's internal or external, you're talking to people involved, stakeholders versus a public audience. But just ask yourself, like you said, and I've taken some PMI training, very, very useful, especially in terms of identifying stakeholders, but that's another conversation. But yeah, just ask yourself, to this audience, what thing do they prize most? And how can I explain to them or propose to them the means to get to that kind of impact?
Another thing you said that I thought was interesting was you said we often fall victim to sharing instead of selling our point. Can you explain that a little bit?
Sure. I pose this question to you and your audience. How many times do you see this presentation? All right. Let's talk about this idea. So first, we're going to discuss the history of the idea. Then we'll talk about how we came up with this idea. We're going to talk about the people who I've invited to brainstorm on this idea. We're going to talk about the amount of money we're going to invest in the idea. And we're going to talk about the 3-year milestones we need to take to effect the idea. Thank you very much. And you know what I never said? Although we've seen that presentation before, I never said why we're taking on this idea. So I've shared the details. I've shared the inventory, the table of contents, if you will. But I did not explain why, like you said, Clint, in the PMI training, why we're doing this. What is the value to this audience? And I'll give you a specific example I love to share. I had a client who created collateral materials, promotional materials, hats and brochures and calendars. And I said, all right, I'm a potential client. Give me your best pitch. And she says, great. Okay, you see this hat? This hat, an elephant could step on this hat and it'll never crush. And you can have your logo on the outside and on the inside. And you see this brochure, there's a special laminate on the brochure where it'll never crunch and it'll never shrink. And you can have both sides of it. And you see this pin, this is a special pin that's a magnet. It's not going to draw any blood. And I'll tell you what, if you order 100 of these pins, I'll give you another 50 at a discounted price. She was all done. And I said, you're done? She said, I'm done. I've described everything well. And I said, you did describe your inventory well. But you know what I never heard? I never heard you say, if you buy my products, you will be more successful. And that was her point. But she never said it because she was too busy describing her inventory instead of selling her point. And one last metaphor that I think is terrific. Think of a book. Think of 2 elements of a book. You have a table of contents and you have a blurb in the back. Both are designed to give a reader insight into the book. But only one sells the book and the other describes the book. The table of contents does not sell the book. Only the blurbs do. So if you want to really sell your point, you want to be the blurber. You don't want to be the person selling or describing and sharing the table of contents.
Oh, totally. Because you always look at the back of the book and say, well, who said what about this book? Because that's that's going to get me to buy it. Mm-hmm. The content seems interesting, but nobody's had anything good to say about it that I don't know if I want to pick it up.
Yeah. And I often say information doesn't sell, but we often think it does, especially if you're like a professor or you're on the research end of it. I'm sharing data. The data doesn't sell itself. You have to transform it into a proving, proposal-making vehicle to truly make it sell. So what you said in the beginning, do not share content, sell the point.
And you mentioned tension magnets and how we share, why we should use them. What about those?
Yeah, there are a few I like to call them magic words that we use to tell people what to do. Some of the magic words are suggest, recommend, besides being share. I want to prove something, not just share it. One of the phrases that I see all the time is people say, I want to allow something to happen. This idea will allow this impact. But allowing means I'm just going to step aside and allow it to happen. The word you want to use is enable, because you are the agent of enablement. You made it happen. So let's use enable versus allow. For the same reason, we want to use prevent versus avoid. You see, you're in the act of preventing. Avoiding is in the act of not really acting. The same thing, you ever hear someone say, we're going to address this issue. What does that mean? Well, we're going to think about it. Maybe I'll create a blue ribbon panel to discuss it. No, we're going to act on that issue. We're going to overcome a challenge, not just face it. And we're going to respond to a situation, not react to it. That's a big one. If I could put some mustard on that, when we react to something, that's an emotional reaction. That made me angry. That made me sad. That made me frustrated. That is not a proactive sort of business move. Responding is a thoughtful way of thinking about an input and responding with a solution, not just reacting with an emotion.
And I may be conflating these, but I think there was also some points you made about, so here's the point, or these big grandiose things. And I think you gave some examples of, I believe she's your favorite speaker, which is Michelle Obama.
Right.
And you talk about how she, in 3 or 4 different examples of how she keeps bringing things back to make sure that her point is understood.
Yeah, absolutely. And, nobody ever comes away from a presentation thinking like, well, Sally, she was great, but she made her point too many times. Nobody says that because the point is the gift. Now, you don't want to say it the same way over and over, but lead with it, illustrate it with a story. And we all know about storytelling. We should talk about strategic storytelling, but end with it, because there's this idea that's been proven by research that people remember what you start with, and what you end with. But there are lots of ways to phrase it. You could show it in data. You could show it in a video. You could illustrate it in a story. You could tell it in a personal experience or a case study. And, I mentioned Michelle Obama, but just because some people are like, well, that's Michelle Obama. I also talk about Taylor Swift.
Yeah.
And Taylor Swift was at an award ceremony a few years ago where she talked about the haters. And she was so crystal clear about telling people to avoid the haters, which will enable you to progress cleanly to your goals and your passions. And it was just such a clean demonstration of point making that I also included it in my book, to make the point that everybody, all of us can be point makers. Nobody is born with these skills. Effective communication is a skill. It is not a talent. So that means that everybody can be a point maker. And the truth is, when you or someone in your audience is about to give a presentation, Michelle Obama cannot give that presentation because she doesn't know what you know. She didn't go through what you went through to become an expert, and she didn't practice like you practice. So you are the only person in the world who can give that presentation effectively. Know that, and that can give you confidence.
I think the other person you mentioned was Demi Moore, and one of her thing. Yeah, I think you said you called it a love letter on LinkedIn to her speech.
Yeah, I mean, I remember it so well because she talked about how early in her career she was being typecast, and she was only getting roles where she played sort of the ditzy girlfriend or the peripheral character, or basically the girlfriend, the quote unquote. And she waited and waited, and she was really driving to get a role that mattered to her. And it wasn't the substance. Now, I'm a fan of horror films, so I saw the substance immediately. And she didn't get the Academy Award. She was nominated. I think she earned a Golden Globe and a BAFTA award. But in her speech, she talked about how her drive to believe in her own potential, even when agents and other people were telling her she can't do that. And through that demonstration, through that point she was making, it was memorable, not just to me, but a lot of people who wrote about that as one of the highlights of the event.
Yeah, I'd never heard the term popcorn actress before, so I had to go
right,
look that one up. What is a popcorn actress? But
we always learn something new.
We do, no matter how old we get. One of the things I like about the book is you talk about making your point in many different vehicles, and so you have some good direction on when we should use email versus chat, which I'm really interested in your thoughts on for the audience, because for me, I'm clearly a conversation guy because that's the name of the podcast, but I feel like human beings have this burning desire to want to check things off of their to-do list. And the best way that I can do that is email you or text you or post something on Slack, and I hope I never hear from you again, because then it's done off my plate. But I'm curious what your thoughts are on when we should use email versus chat or some other form.
Yeah, let me give you a personal example. I was writing a keynote speech with a team, and I wouldn't call it a disagreement, but we were trying to get on the same page about the fact that this big keynote speech needed a point. It couldn't be just addressing the history of this topic. or just, they would keep hitting me with a theme or an idea. And I would keep saying, well, what does the CEO want to say about that idea? What does he want to propose, not just share stuff? But we were going at it on a chat, on a professional chat page. It's sort of like Skype or like Slack. And we're going back and forth. And there was a third person in the room, and they said, you know what? I don't think this is the vehicle, because you're both writing 5-word sentences. You're going back and forth. And she was right. And we had to move that to a Zoom meeting so we can give these full-throated explanations and not have to rely on our fingers in this short form. So in the book, I break down about a meeting is about big ideas and sharing it and trying to inform other people. Chats and Slacks, I believe, are really just about quick updates, something you need to say quickly, or if it's extremely urgent. An email is a one-sided communication. So if you're saying, I need to inform you about something, but it's not a back and forth yet, but maybe the next step is, I just need you to review something, or I need to share my experience at a conference or in a previous conversation. This is where I'm sort of going to download it to you in a very, strategic way. I do a lot of email coaching as well, but that's the opportunity there. So realize email is not a back and forth. If you need instant answers, if you need a back and forth, do something like that. If it's involved and you need more time, schedule a Zoom meeting. And if it's a quickie, I just need a yes or no. How do we move forward? I need your attention right now. That's when you get into the chats and Slacks.
Yeah, I think asynchronous communication is great for yes/no answers, or answers to yes/no questions, and or saying, "Hey, here's a summary of what we just talked about." That's great. But if I've had this even happen within my own group, where I saw 2 of my team members emailing back and forth, and I finally said, "Stop. You all need to get on the call and solve this. You're spending way too much bandwidth, and you don't understand the context, and you're misreading what they're saying because you're having a bad day. You pick up the phone and let's have a call and talk this out."
Yeah, and you're loading up the inboxes. And, if there's one thing in my email training that's more important than anything else, it's about the subject line. Because I see too many Thursday. And that was 6 Thursdays ago. And someone's got a big idea in there and like, wait, I woke up with this breakthrough idea. I'm going to send it to the team. And the subject line is rethink. I actually, in the training, I have people break out their phones and look into their sent mail. And after I train them, I say, tell me the ones that you're really not proud of now. And they share them. They're like the idea, timing, and this is critical. And this is the one big thing I think people take away more than anything else, because when you wake up in the morning and look at your inbox, you're not seeing the emails. You're just seeing the subject lines, and you're making big time decisions. Do I read this now? Do I archive it? Or do I delete it? Because that thread is not important to me anymore. And if you make the wrong decision, that could create a serious, serious delay in process.
You're seeing the title of the book, but not the blurb on the back.
Right, exactly.
You even have some communication style or some suggestions for PowerPoint, which I found interesting, because I guess there's a couple of different thoughts on how you should fill the page or not fill the page.
Yeah, and let me leave you with one thought, because, well, 2 thoughts really. I mean, some people say death by PowerPoint, and they say it's gone, it's antiquated. I don't believe that. For one reason, I'm a visual learner, Clint. I need to see it. And when I see it and hear it at the same time, it will stick. But if I just hear it, frankly, I'm not as good an audio or audible learner. I'm not going to get it as cleanly. All right. So now I need slides. I need visuals. And some people say the 5x5 or 6x6 rule, 5 bullets, 5 words each, or 6 bullets, 6 words each. You can Google or AI, all that. So I'm going to leave you with the one biggest thing I find over and over. Even in a client I have right now, a CEO client who's about to give a major presentation, and that is the title space of the slides. That is the most powerful real estate on a slide, where you have the title and then the images and the bullets go below that. But what do I see? The title just says data. Yeah, it says data. Beliefs, background, history, data points, the message, goals, learnings. It's like the Dewey Decimal System. They're just sort of putting a label on the content. If someone's checking their email for a moment and not paying attention, they come back, they are lost if it just says data or challenges. So what you want to do is put the point there. There is a brilliant guy, a professor named Michael Alley. He writes a lot about what he calls the assertion evidence principle of slide telling, especially for scientists. In the title goes an assertion in the format of a headline. In the bottom is evidence for that assertion. And I just love the simplicity of that. But in terms of the points, think in terms of the one big takeaway you want people to hear. So let's break that down. You don't want to say data. You don't want to say recommendations. You want to say 20% of professionals believe X over Y. You want to say data shows movement toward this, or recommendation. Think full, not binary. Think multiplicity, not binary. Whatever it is, pretend like nothing else is on the slide but that title. And you want people to get the key message. Now, every slide should have one big message. If it's not, you're trying to compound too many ideas in a single slide. So once we solve that problem, put that idea in the title space. So people are like, aha, I get the point of this slide. Now I'm going to sit back and let you prove it to me.
Right. And that's a challenge, I think, for somebody like me who, when I give presentations, it might be 2 or 3 hours for some topics. And if I'm using PowerPoint, which is my least favorite medium, but because it is static, and you're balancing that with them. They're going to get the slides later, so I probably need to put as much information on here as I can because they won't have to take notes. And there's a philosophy of just put a picture and then you talk about, talk around it. So it was really helpful to some of the stuff you suggested.
Mm-hmm. Good. And I often tell people to take one slide and to turn it into 3 slides because they have 3 ideas. We've seen it before. I'm going to talk about internal, external, and around the world. And you see the world picture and the internal picture. But when they present that, they're talking about internal. And I'm like, I'm sort of curious in that world thing. I'm going to take a look at that while you're talking about internal, that third thing that you're going to get to 2 points from now. So what I say is, make that 3 slides so we're focused on each at a time. And they say, yeah, but Joel, that will triple my time. No, it won't, because you're still dealing with them one at a time. You're just clicking. In fact, you could even do it in animation so it doesn't look like you're going to different slides.
Yeah.
So it's important to know, back to that principle of one idea at a time, even an email, and definitely on a slide. And what that helps you with is when you do need to cut. And by the way, if you have more slides than time and you're running out of time, always cut, never speed up. Because anything you speed up, they're not going to digest. You could always share that later in a follow-up communication. So when you break it up like that, 1 point per slide, it actually helps you understand what's more important than something else. And once you understand that, then you can decide where to cut.
Yeah, I'm somebody who's famous for in my presentations, I have more, I put more in than I know that I can cover because I'm going to give it to them anyway. But now, having read the book, I'm going to make sure at the end I say, and here's the key point I want you to take away.
Right.
Just to make sure that they have that and they can go through all the gory details as they want to.
Yeah. And it's this theme I mentioned before, the beginning and the end. It's actually a research thing called primacy and recency. Primacy is the very start, and that is sticky because it's not being compared or competing with anything else. That's where you get at the beginning. That's why you don't want to delay your point. It's not like a movie where you're going to spoil the ending. I'm going to show you why if we do X, Y will result. And at the end, it's called recency. People will remember it more because it's the most recent thing they heard. Now, some people blow it by saying, this will save lives. Now I'd like to bring up a new speaker. Or this will save lives. And now I'm ready for Q&A. Something that's a lot less important, but I'm going to bury my point, my final moment of recency, and run right into Q&A because I don't understand that a pause will help people digest that final point, apply it, understand its relevance, maybe write it down, perhaps tweet it. They need time to do all of that stuff in their head. That's why you need to pause at the very end.
Yeah, I think that was another important takeaway for me because even though I was born and raised in the South, mom and dad did not pass down the slow talking gene. So I tend to talk fast, and you make a point of that in the book. You say that if you talk fast, you're probably not going to be able to slow down, so don't bother, but at least put some purposeful pauses in so you give people a chance to catch up because they're filtering it through everything. They're trying to hear what you're saying, and if you go to the next topic, they're still stuck 3 topics back.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, you need to build in that time. So two things I recommend for fast speakers, because I'm naturally one as well. And I'm going to blame it on New York City and the Northeast. But the one thing is what you mentioned, embrace pauses, because that'll bring your speedometer down to zero. It may go up again. But at least it creates these breaks that will help you. And like you said, help your audience, give them cognitive time to realize it. The other trick, and this one is almost a hack, raise your volume. If you raise, you have a limited amount of breath in your lungs.
Yeah.
If you raise your volume, that takes a lot of breath. So I find it nearly impossible to speak loudly and quickly at the same time because I just don't have enough breath to do both simultaneously. So that's a good trick for people who speak too quickly. Try going louder and it'll be impossible to maintain that rate.
Yeah, I speak pretty loud anyway, but I'm going to try that because I remember early in my career, I was teaching a class over in Prague in the Czech Republic, and it was a 2-day class, and I got to lunch on the first day, and I said, "How are we doing?" And it was dead silence. And I said, "Are you guys okay?" It was dead silence. I said, "Does anybody understand anything that I'm saying?" Dead silence. Finally, a guy on the front row said, "Perhaps you could speak a little slower." So
Right.
I try to remind people, and I tell people, listen, if I start talking too fast, tell me. Writing on the evaluation form at the end of class that Clint talks too fast is not helpful. It's too late.
Yeah.
You got to tell me in the session. But I think the pauses will be something that can help me.
Yeah. And the reason I think about it every day, because how often does someone leave us a message on the phone where they say, "Hey, this is Sharon Johnson. Just call me back at 255-321." It's like, what could be more important? They could even say, "Oh, this is really urgent. It's about your dad. Just call me back at this is Clarence Johnson, 422. And I'm like, how could you possibly think that that's appropriate when you want me to call you back on something that's urgent? But it illustrates like how we just don't think about that kind of priorities in communication.
Yeah, I try on this. It's quick aside. I try on those calls to make sure I say my number at the beginning and say it at the end as well, because they started writing it at the beginning and they lost, and now I'll be able to catch up at the end. So
yeah, I say my wife makes fun of me actually because I always say 1, 2, 1, 2. She laughs at me, but you got to do what you got to do. It's not about the fact that you said it; they have to hear it.
another thing you said, and you were talking about, you had people pull out their phones and go through their emails looking for the RE. I think you also talked about having people look for some of what you call, I think, the bad adjectives or the badjectives, which is how many look for all the ands and be able to see if you could take out some of them. Talk about that in a minute.
Yeah, let's talk about adjectives because I see a lot of presentations where this idea is great. This idea is fantastic. This campaign is just going to blow people away. Listen, Clint, I had a tuna fish sandwich yesterday that was great. That was awesome. And it did blow me away because it was just chopped perfectly, had celery and onions, just like I like it. Now, if I'm using the same adjective to describe a tuna fish sandwich that I would for a breakthrough marketing program, that adjective is not doing me a service. And that's a badjective. And badjectives are like great, very good, awesome, blow me away. Even interesting is a badjective because lots of things are interesting. So I call them badjectives because it's a wasted sentence at the end of the day because it's just too broad. How do you get rid of them? If you spot them in your speech, in your email, before you send it, in your article, in your blog, in your post, two things. One is to ask yourself why. I said something is great. Why is it great? Well, it'll be a huge cost savings for us. All right. So this is great because it'll be a cost savings. Now, why not just eliminate that adjective in the middle? This will create a cost savings. We're removing less is more and more is less. So we ask that question and we eliminate that. The other thing you mentioned, I think, is really important. And I'm about to post something tomorrow about this on LinkedIn. It's called the and audit. If you look for the word and in your emails, in your blogs, in your posts, and in your speeches, it'll often be a place where there are two ideas when one will do. Either they are synonyms, the same really in meaning, or one will be so much more important than the other. Why share them and take the chance that someone will remember the wrong one, the least important one? So look for that word and look for the competition of 2 points, 2 words, 2 descriptors, whether they're phrases or adjectives, and choose one. Kill that and. We think of and as our friend, our partner in communication. Oh, I can add more words here. But at the end of the day, as we discussed, one word will almost always be better, one descriptor, one point at a time, one descriptor at a time. So, it's hard to sort of look for those or just cut in places. But if you use the and audit, you'll know the places where you can definitely strike.
Well, it goes back to what you said earlier about the Christmas tree effect of the more ornaments I put on, the better, right? And so we're going to save lives and save money. I don't think the money matters when you compare it to lives. So
absolutely.
Yeah, it's really, really good. So the badgetives I thought was interesting as well. So going back to your example, you could say, well, I know you said tuna salad, let's say egg salad. The balance of mayonnaise and pickles and egg was perfect on this sandwich, right? Or it's just like I like it on this sandwich. The ratio was great,
Yeah.
So.
And I use that with the fourth graders also. We go around, I say, the shirt is great. And then we have to go around the room and everyone has to replace my adjective of great with something else. The shirt was blue. The shirt was oversized. The shirt was silly. And then that starts them learning about specific telling and moving adjectives versus broad and purposeless adjectives.
Well, that concludes part one of my conversation with Joel Schwartzberg, communication coach, public speaking expert, and author of Get to the Point. Coming up in part two, Joel gives advice for how to gracefully respond if you're interrupted in a professional setting.
Here's the hack. Actually, I read this somewhere and I love sharing it. You want to solve the problem with a compliment. Hey, Jim, thanks for that point. You added something really interesting. I'm going to think about that. I just want to finish what I was saying about, or hey, Sally, I appreciate the feedback and your opinion. I'm going to think about that. I just want to make sure everyone understands what I was saying about. When you lead with that compliment, they feel good. People feel good. You gave them a compliment and you could still finish your point.
Thanks for listening to The Conversation. To find out more about Clint, go to ClintonMPaget.com and pick up Clint's book, How Teams Triumph, Managing by Commitment, at Amazon. The Conversation with Clinton M. Paget is a production of Forbes Books.